Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly webinar produced by Business Performance USA. We're so glad to have you in the audience today as our guests. Our webinar today is given by Dr. Jefferson Stewart, and it's the three-part series on ownership excellence. He starts today with part one, change leadership. I'll be your host today. I'm Cynthia Stewart, and I'm managing partner for Evermore Services, LLC. I'll be uh, working with Victor Dominguez. He is going to be your co-host today, and he's interim executive director of Business Performance USA, along with owning his own company, Ligature Group. Now we have as our presenter Dr. Jeff Stewart. He's first speaker and agent to Board of Trustees, Board of Directors, and CXO's offices. Dr. Stewart has been serving Fortune 10, 100, 1000 firms for more than 30 years by focusing top leaders on the critical dimensions of core intellectual properties and on timing rapid market entries for their emerging businesses. His career to date, if you can believe this, and it's true, we have witness to this, his economic value creation is in the range of 14 figures. So he's worked with top leaders in launching new businesses and growing new businesses throughout his career. He's also served as an ordained elder and an elder at large for his faith communities, as well as being a very loyal Eagle Scout of the Boy Scouts of America. We welcome Dr. Stewart. Now, to make your time worthwhile today, what we hope is that you will ask questions. You can use the question tool anytime, and I'll be monitoring that and let Dr. Stewart know when there is a question that he can answer. And if you have any questions after the seminar today, the webinar today, go ahead and write this down, Victor at businessperformanceusa.org, and send him your questions. Also, you can visit YouTube and watch previous webinars by going to Business Performance USA, the membership forum, signing up, and then you have access to our webinars as well as our white papers. And with that, what I'd like to do is welcome Dr. Stewart. Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and pass my screen back over to you, and you can begin.
Um, hmm.
Cynthia, there may be a little glitch here. Let me just jump in and remind folks. I'll say this while Dr. Jeff is switching over to his screen, that these webinars and all of our content can be viewed and interacted with on Business Performance USA. All you need to do is, the easiest way to do it is sign up and become a member. Go to the home page, look for the little B, our icon for the worker bee, and you'll just take a couple of steps to become a member, and then all of our content, webinars, white papers, blogs, are right there at your fingertips, right on your own personal wall, and it's a really easy way to connect and interact with us. Just want to put that thought out there. Looks like Dr. Jeff is ready to go, so I'll back out.
There we go. Okay. Sorry about the glitch. Apparently a dialog box had cropped up which had not moved to the front of my screen, and so I was out of contact appropriately. Today's subject is change leadership. You won't find it emblazoned all over everything, but you will find it in the lozenge right at the top behind the lovely young lady's head. Change leadership is the lead feature for ownership excellence as a series of topics to consider, and I'll mention it on and off throughout, but the most important thing to realize is that it's one of three aspects of change that feed ownership excellence. There's change leadership, change execution, and change implementation. And those are the titles and topics of the next couple of webinars that I'll do as well. So change leadership, change execution, and change implementation. Basically, where you have delegation, you have change execution and programmatic response. And where you have change implementation, you have toolkits and teams interacting with each other. And the character of each one of these presentations will reflect those differences. Today, change leadership will focus on uh, the mind share that a leader enjoys from an ownership point of view. Now, that's a little complicated. Most of us think of owners as somehow different from the leaders in a business or as the owners and operators of their own businesses. And sometimes we think of ownership as having little to do with the executive team unless we've incentivized them with some form of equity. And we often don't think of ownership at all in the context of people who just get the job done, unless it's something like an ESOP, an employee stock ownership company. Um, but I'm going to make a case based on principle and practice that ownership is something that belongs to everybody when they're engaged in a common quest for excellence. So ownership excellence is the name of the series. And the first principle is that you have to own up to self-discipline. You know, it's real easy to point a finger. I mean, I do it in the morning. I get up and I look in the mirror and I say, oh my gosh, that again. And I say, wow, I can just, cruise through the day. I'll go sit in my shorts at the computer screen and not worry about it. But it's very rare that I actually do that, because it turns out that over life, I've picked up a set of common starting habits. And uh, I begin to exercise discipline on myself, not just controlling myself. That was part of the decision to exercise discipline, but disciplining myself, making sure that I'm presenting myself to the world in a way that I would want to be seen and hope that people would want to see me. And I would expect both the feedback and the feed forward. Hey, the next time you do that, by the way, you might do such and such. That's feedback on the one hand, but it's also feed forward on the other, because it presumes in the statement that someone is going to be present to me another time. So when you own up to self-discipline, you make a decision to not only take charge and get out in front with your expectations, but to hear very well what others are telling you about their experience. Because if you don't, what you expect may not be what you get. You may end up being very surprised. And in the essence, then you carry your briefcase on life forward and you move on from there. You see, leaders end up coming from the inside out in the present moment. When I look in the mirror in the morning, it's no different than getting down in the starting blocks for a race. That's right. We have our little rituals that we get going, and those little rituals help us be present in the moment. But when I look in the mirror, it's me looking from the inside out in that present moment. It's important to understand that if I'm going to take the lead in my own life, or if you're going to take the lead in what you do as an owner, that you come from the inside of your experience as the owner and lead from there in a present way. I've called it a moment because a moment is, at least a dipole. That is to say, there is at least two positions or poles that are engaged, plus and minus. Um, it's the same thing that gives us alternating current, but it is, by the way, possible to talk about a moment as a monopole. That is to say, just you in the moment, focus through the moment on what is happening from the inside out into the world. That's very important, because if you can't go to the monopole, if you can't find yourself, then leading change becomes very difficult. How do you know that you're actually serving as a role model for the changes that you want to see in business? You know, serving as a role model is tough. It means at least knowing when and where you can trust your teammates with resolving the focus on results, moment to moment. Each moment is a focal moment. Each moment flips from positive to negative, from positive to negative, or is a monopole. Sometimes, if we're just the tool itself, for example, if I'm called in front of a board and I'm asked to be present to catalyze a change in opinion, what I do is become a monopole, a catalyst. And in that monopolistic moment, that monopolar experience, I have to reach through my individual life into the others. I have to sort of go from there into where they are and let myself be, let myself go away. So when that happens, then the role model that I'm casting in that meeting with the board becomes an expression of trust in those who are at the board meeting. Now, those of you who've been at board meetings know that it's not always that idealistic. Sometimes the realism in a board meeting is that it's a pressure cooker that day, or that it's just so lackadaisical and laid back because nobody was really prepared. In any event, when you trust your teammates, you resolve to focus on results each moment that you're present. So what I
Dr.
need
Jeff?
to, yeah, sure.
Victor Dominguez here, everyone. Thanks for letting me jump in. So, Dr. J, if I can simplify this, boil it down to the root or the beginning, change isn't necessarily easy. And when I look for myself, change isn't easy because I have to sometimes get out of my own way. So before we can, so what I think I hear in you saying, I'd like you to elaborate, when you're looking at creating change from an organization, what sometimes we're talking about is capturing full potential. Because I know with myself, I have a realization of what my full potential is, but I need to change certain behaviors to get out of my own way to realize that. So I guess what I'm hearing you say is that before you can change your organization, you need to step up, reach within, that's the inside part, and bring out your own full potential and have the discipline to do it every single day. So that's sometimes uncomfortable. And that's where that's that's where change leadership actually begins with yourself. Am I on track here?
Yeah, you are on track. I have tried to avoid using the word self because it pulls us so far away from walking the walk that we spend more time talking about the walk, or talking the talk. And I think that walking the walk is the key to real leadership. You know, I said the place we start is change leadership, because where we have to end up is in change implementation. We have to delegate through execution and executives who know how to keep our programs running. And we have to work into the toolkits that are first and foremost extensions of our own skill sets and capacities. Once we're able to do that, then we have to know when to let go. If you're in a tight team, a high performance team, the first thing that becomes true is you have to lead almost seamlessly every time somebody else gives over from their expertise to another. So the thing that I like to focus on is the present moment. That is, there is always for me a dipole. And I don't mean to suggest that everything is dualistic or something like that. What I mean is that in every presence, there is another. And there's a kind of process that leaders go through that takes the mystery out of the otherness and makes it equally present to them. That process, if you like, is the process of role modeling. And in doing that, they have choices to make. Um, Now, for business, we know we need to build more and more trust. So the results become key because as we move through the moments of our lives, it's the results that breed the trust. And when we can resolve the focus on results, that is at the right level of activity or the right organization of activity, then we are more likely to get what we're expecting than otherwise. Does that help?
It does indeed. Thank you, Jeff.
So if I move on from here, I'd like to put out what I call a double-barreled value proposition. That is, it's two value propositions that really entail each other. Now you can look at it in a linear fashion to say, given this, then this will happen, or you can look at it as a set of overlapping values that kind of operate in a loose relationship together. I would encourage you, for the sake of what we're doing today, to think of it as a propositional statement. So, first of all, there's growing leaders, and when you grow leaders, you grow business. Because when you reach from inside out, you take your message into the world, and as you get busy in the world, the business grows. So, growing leaders grows business. And then, if you're growing business, you're also doing something else. You're growing economic and cultural value. Um, that's a little bit less obvious, but imagine for a minute that the business is just one person, right? And as a person, you take on a professional role, and as you grow in the professional role and gain recognition, your business grows and you become economically more valuable. In fact, you become culturally more valuable to the organizations and the people that you serve as an individual in the business world. Now, backing off from that, let me just say this. Businesses have a unique status when we form them legally. They actually exist as persons under our legal system. And as a result, a business has a character and a set of values and a set of behaviors for which it becomes responsible. And we grant it the rights of a person so that we can address it and hold it responsible like we do the leaders of a business. So the leader is responsible, and if the leader dies, then the business is responsible. And if the business dies, who's responsible? Well, therein we get to a lot of issue. So the cultural value of a business also combines with its economic value. And we talk about all kinds of things in business, like key person insurance, for example. The key people on a leadership group in a traditional business would be insured so that the company would have the wherewithal to make up the difference should something happen to one or more of them. And in a business, we will also go for professional and um, sometimes for other kinds of facilities and operational insurances to make sure that those people that we engage, either as partners or as clients, are certified in their ability to realize a certain level of reward if something goes wrong. We call that insurance, performance insurance, and so forth and so on. So all around us, we've enveloped ourselves and developed further ways of securing economic and cultural value because we recognize this double-barreled proposition. Growing leaders grows business, and growing business grows economic and cultural value. So what does this say about ownership excellence? To excel as an owner, we need to not only grow ourselves as leaders, but we need to grow our businesses as leaders in the economic community. As such, our businesses assume a cultural value not only within their own organization, but within the broader culture where we, quote, do business. Are there any questions at that point? It's kind of circular, it seems, but it really is propositional.
All good, Jeff.
Good. Well, here comes the big challenge of the day. This is a picture of change. And it's a picture that I'll come back to frequently, not only in this presentation for this quarter over a series of 3 on ownership excellence, but going forward over several quarters as we go through other series as well. This is a story about how change occurs, or at least it's a map that you can write a story around. Remember when you were a child and you encountered your first piece of fantasy or fairy tale literature, and the first thing you see is a map. And the map is this crazy imaginal landscape in which all the action is going to occur. That's what this picture is like. This picture lets us know all the things and all the places we end up when we get involved with change in our businesses. We have to deal with strategy, culture, systems, structure, and core process. You know, it's really hard for people to get all that. Most of the time, we're struggling to keep up with the environment around us. Or worse, we're struggling to get the results that are expected of us, either by investors or by customers or partners or whatever. So we talk sometimes about the business environment and we say we can't really control that. And we talk a lot about results and we say that we can't control all of them because there are unintended outcomes for everything that we do. But we can talk about key results and we can talk about key results areas and get very specific and metric. So under results in this picture, you see current key results areas, current measurement and tracking system, and so on. And you notice we get all the way through financial, revenue, and cost structures. Um, if that's all we ever did to be literate about business, to be able to share with others in some documentary form exactly what we'd accomplished, then by the way, we'd be well ahead of the curve. Do we ever look at environment? Well, key customers, suppliers, key competitors, and all of that. Yeah, we typically do, especially if we think we're off course. But you know, it's like running a race. When you're racing for revenue, you typically find that looking over your shoulder causes you to trip and fall. So you typically don't pay too much attention to environment once you've got your current market conditions identified, unless something cataclysmic happens or something well beyond the control of your own planning begins to take charge of the world around you. So how do we know when that happens? We know because of strategy. We get involved in the organization of what we're doing and how we conduct business in any current situation or any moment as a regard to that. So you can begin to see without going through this chart in great detail how it represents a kind of imaginal landscape for the dramatic action of business and economic value creation. Any questions at this point? Because this can go on and it can cover darn near everything. It's a global map.
Well, Dr. J, Victor again here. And when I look at this map, which we're all well familiar with at Business Performance USA, and I overlay the concept of change leadership, I quickly understand that I really cannot affect one area, such as strategy, without considering the change that's going to happen within the other 4 sectors. So really, when I look at this, I see nothing is an island and everything is interconnected. And so one really needs to think through how change is going to be impacted through the whole way. The best way I find to do that is not just involve the leadership team, but get out there in the field and talk to the front line, talk to the people who will be impacted by change and get their input. And typically they will be able to identify ways where they can contribute. They can identify bottlenecks in regards to the change that you're planning. And perhaps even with tenured employees that they can say, well, we've tried that before. Because frankly, CEOs unfortunately don't last too long in companies, and some of their change ideas may have actually been implemented before, at least in principle, and the employees can understand how that's going to affect their world. So do you recommend that as well, that you bring in a multidisciplinary team to comprehend how change will be affected throughout the organization?
That's a really good question, Victor. And I will tell you that it reminds me of a professor that I had who gave a short lecture and then gave us a test immediately after the 150 words. Thank you very much. I hope that I passed the test. Your question was well phrased and well formed, and the lead up to it was instructive. What I'd like to point out is that the interconnectedness of the world outside of the environment is a matter of intra-connection within the business itself. So when we engage each other, when we become a culture of engagement, we are intra-connected. Within the boundaries of the way we work, we draw ourselves into projects and programs and even portfolios of interest and value. So yes, I do recommend that we get into the field. But we need to remember, of course, that whether it's operational or organizational, it's the ownership that establishes the disciplinary requirements of the field that we're entering. So that's why there's so much that can be talked about as we go through. I would like to point something out. We have chosen to make sure that the arrows, if you like, the arrows of motion move counterclockwise from strategy to core, through structure to systems to culture, and back to strategy again. And the imputation there is that if you want to get a good long distance view of what you're up to, then you will go to the core first, like I said, from the inside out. And you'll examine the structure, and you'll be certain that your workout is working well. And then you'll engage systematically as well as systemically with others in your teams and groups. As you go through that, you're actually turning back the clock. The feedback holds you back from overt action or even covert action that would be deleterious for the outcomes you anticipate. That is, would not be good for creating the economic value and the culture that you envision. Because culture is where you end up next. It's a work culture with its own norms, its own morals, its own job satisfaction requirements. But all of those things are meaningless if people spend their life disengaged or in denial. The hidden costs of a widely disengaged workforce are absolutely astonishing, and most people really barely scratch the surface when they begin to analyze or even try to make something better out of a culture that has been broadly disengaged. As I'm put in mind right now, our presentation next week, I believe, is in regard to the costs of disengagement and what can be done about that from the point of view of growing and moving forward, not standing there in the morass and letting the alligators bite you on the, oops, sorry, bottom. So I'm going to move on now, if that's all right with you.
Good idea.
The point that leaders must take to heart, and I put it that way fairly straightforwardly, is that they must engage with their culture's prevailing mindset. So how do they engage? It must be intimate. They have ultimate plans and goals and so forth and so on. But strategy and the ultimate goals are really beyond reach if the leaders are not intimately engaged with their culture's prevailing mindset. So, what is a prevailing mindset? It's a system of work. In fact, it's multiple systems at work, as we saw in the previous map. Leaders have to know their own limits. Now, that sounds like mom talking to me, saying, well, you ought to be careful when you go out and cross the street. You can't turn that bus upside down. And every, adolescent in America today has superhero fantasies, men and women alike. Leaders have to know their own limits. In the world of business, we typically call that span of control, because in the end, we do have to step beyond our limits of control and endorse and entrust the work of others in concert with us. There is a certain sympathetic vibe, if you like, when a business is humming along. And that vibe sets the rhythm for the run or the race for revenue. You see, leaders of high performance teams, especially the owners of those teams, uh, have to realize that their spans of control are really about smoothing out delivery streams. In the end, what matters are the results, the deliverables. And a leader can only draw down about 20% of the mind share at any time in order to get down the road. If they draw down on more than that, they end up basically breaking hearts and minds. Have you ever been in an organization or a team where the stressors got to be too much? Well, then you know what I mean about going over that 20% mark in the mind share world. Leaders have their mind shares. If they are overworked, then they lose a sense of direction. The same thing is true of anyone who leads from any position, be it subject matter, technical, or otherwise, as they move through the business. Ultimately, our leaders are the keys to high performing teams, because every high performing team is made up of leaders in their own world who work from inside out into the worlds of others and find themselves devoting 80% of their mind shares to casting clearer and clearer visions of why and how their cultures work like they do, work to achieve in the end and to sustain, we hope, excellence. So how does that stack up? Let me just move on from that rather complicated statement to a chart which is rather telling. Now, I've used this chart before in a slightly different circumstance when I was talking about culture and about organization and or operation and organization, excuse me, um, where the characteristics of operational points of view are on the vertical under value creation, and the characteristics of organizational activity are across the top or on the horizontal. Um, what's a little bit different in this case is that I've suggested that perspective, that is, objectivity and subjectivity in some sort of dynamic balance, is a key part of operation, and that it feeds into the organizational elements very, very strongly and has huge value. So without getting into the details of the chart again, that's available in another webinar that we presented. I'd like to talk about that bottom line down there that has a T over 2, T/2. And you notice that it goes two ways, from left to right inside each of the columns: subject matter technical, business process, and cultural. So T over 2 represents the balance point between objectivity and subjectivity. Why is it T over 2? Because over time, or throughout time, we have to deal with ambiguity. And if I say I've got 10 minutes to get something done and I've already used 5 minutes, it's no longer ambiguous as I move forward. But before that point, it's pretty darn ambiguous, right? So what we do is we move from our objectivity about the ambiguity of our moment towards a subjective experience of that moment, and where we're dead certain that we're right, But how often are we likely to be wrong? Well, more often than we'd like to think, depending upon how many things we take on. So what I'd like to suggest is that the balance point between objectivity and subjectivity represents what I call the half-life of objectivity. Because in business, even for people who are perceived in things like entertainment as being personalities, subjectivity is the last thing that they want to achieve. They want to maintain that objectivity in order to grow value, whether it's at the technical level or in the process of doing a specific business and deliverable situation, or at the cultural and organizational level where they actually yield the results that matter the most to the people on the outside and the inside of the business. Questions?
So I'm looking at this, Dr. J, and in the vertical columns, technical, process, and cultural, I get a little blurry between technical and process because sometimes I think of technical as process. Can you differentiate the two for me?
Yeah, sure. The boundary between the two is where your subjective nature as an expert meets the world of others and how they do things as experts. When that occurs, you move into the world of process. And when you have value creation outcomes, you move into the world of economics and business. So, did that help at all? I mean, the fact is, we all get down into what we're doing pretty fast. And at a subject matter technical end, it happens even faster. And so we really have to rely on others to keep us objective. And as we do that, we create business processes.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay.
And another quick question about perspective. I find perspective is a difficult thing to accomplish when one is deep into their endeavors. And, we look at artists, musicians, performers who sometimes need to step away from their work and come back at it with a fresh eye. We look at athletes who may videotape themselves recording their swing or their feet and hand movements. But how can a business owner step back and somehow refresh their perspective of their strategy or their culture, because it's the classic you can't see the forest through the trees kind of effect? Any
Yeah,
suggestions on
yeah,
ways to
yeah.
gain fresh perspective?
Yeah, it really strikes me all of a sudden. Maybe I should have thought of this and footnoted it here. Um, Roger S. Poole, Poole, Roger S. Poole, way back when, in the days of yore, that is when I was alive and not a white bearded guy, uh, Roger S. Poole wrote a book called Towards a Deep Subjectivity. And what he was addressing was how we get deeply into ourselves and see that in the world around us, and then sharing that with others, arrive at points of value in our decision making, excuse me. So the book is very small. Actually, it's only about 80 or 90 pages, as I recall, and it is a classic out there. Roger S. Poole, Towards Deep Subjectivity. And what he's implying by that is the more deeply you engage, the more you balance your subjectivity with the subjectivity of others. So you end up with a perspectival reality. When we're working in the world, it doesn't mean we lose our value sets or that we have to change our characters. It means that we need to rely upon the reality of others, especially as owners. So up at the top, notice that it says OE to the third power. That means that we have organizational and operational times ownership excellence, and that's where we really start to get the big payoffs. So what I'd like to point out is that the half-life of objectivity is a culturally dependent variable. Depending upon the aspect of the included culture, whether it's technical or process, or the culture itself reflected in the culture of others, the half-life of objectivity varies. So, for example, um, if I'm a technician and I'm going into the shop at a major auto manufacturer to run an automated welding machine, the subjectivity of the moment will shift forward at fast gear from the point at which I put myself on the line with the machines. Because I know them so well, I tend to take them for granted. My subjective experience overruns the objectivity of the system. So we build in things like stall buzzers and warning lights and things like that to keep us from becoming uh, too subjective. And those are versions of human interfaces that we've automated to help us overcome what I call the half-life of objectivity problem. So how to prolong objectivity becomes the primary or the focal strategy for owners who want to excel in their businesses. As I've said it here, the focal strategy for ownership excellence, for excelling by owning up in front of the operating culture, as well as before the expectant minds of all their stakeholders. That could be your team technically, it could be a set of teams that are engaged in executing a complex deliverable, or even more so, it could be a macro culture that embodies numerous teams and projects and programs. In the end, authenticity has to be shot through, as I call it, the canopy of the woods that we call business. Now, that's kind of a poetic image, but the fact is that we are covered over and protected from the heat of the sun out there by all of the things that we do to create mutual assurance for ourselves when we work together and place bets together on the outcomes. That's the pari-mutual form of it, and the para-mutual form of it, P-A-R-A, is the assurance angle. We work together to cut the costs of deliverable, and that means the unintended outcomes as well. So any anticipatory insights become side effects. What we really have to do is increasingly succeed at extending the neural systems of our enterprise. We have to own up to self-discipline, and we have to move ahead, often into fields that are only partially surveyed, and sometimes even uncharted territories. Why do we do that? It's because we want to refine the cultural ideals. In the end, we all have ideal customers and clients, but we also have ideal partners, we have ideal leadership models, we have ideal businesses and outcomes. Anticipating becomes more important than death. It's not my insight. It was a gentleman that we refer to as St. Augustine of Hippo who came up with that in the first place. He said, in the end, being able to anticipate the grace that delivers us from the inevitable and gives us the promised outcome that we believe in is more important than missing the mark and failing. So leaders who own up to self-discipline, who practice getting out in front of their own expectations so others can see them, exemplify ownership excellence. They, in turn, earn their fair share, their just share of the value of their own cultural performances. And I would say that quite clearly. Cultures perform. Therefore, cultures are persons. And cultures, in that personal aspect, have social responsibilities as well. So I'd like to kind of wrap up with that for the moment and leave us open to the next round of change execution, where we learn to extend our span of control and delegate activity in a trustworthy fashion going forward. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff.
And we are about 15 minutes to the hour, and we have a few more minutes that we can entertain any questions if you'd like to pose those. Victor, let's start with you. Any additional questions?
I don't know. It's not a question per se. It's a summary, and I always like to summarize with Dr. Jeff to see if I can comprehend and reiterate what I've learned. So to sum this up, the owner benefits, the owner of a business benefits by being authentic with their employees, with the entire company of employees, as well as all the stakeholders, being customers and investors and whatnot. That authenticity sets the tone for the culture. Number two, the culture in turn benefits the business owner by being by providing a true and authentic perspective back as to the realities of where the business is presently and where it may be able to go, its capacity for moving forward in the marketplace. And that culture in turn also extends the objectivity for the business owner. So the business owner can, in other words, create a reality check with all of the stakeholders within the marketplace and not dilute themselves into thinking they're better or worse or whatnot than they really are. Is that an accurate summary, Dr. Jeff?
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good summary. The thing that I want to say about it is that we are moving out of an era in which reality checks were a matter of inspection, and we're moving into an era big time in which checking our reality is a matter of expectation. So I want to say that very clearly because if we engage in too much inspection, then we basically end up what people used to call navel gazing, not getting out from inside ourselves and into the world outside, and therefore not responding to the real demands of marketplace, but only to the imagined ones. And I'm not reducing the value of imagination at all. I'm saying that when we are deluded, that the imagination is equally powerful as when we are uh, scientifically aware. When we open our minds to the knowledge that's right in front of us and we look out the window of our lives and we understand that that big world out there is a place that we can move through and engage fully the same way we do safely and securely inside our jobs or inside our businesses or inside our regional and national cultures. When we engage like that, what we really do is turn around and focus on humanizing the process of life around us. And that humanization is something that people typically don't pay close attention to. Why? I can't give you a clear answer to that right now, but I could point you in 1,000 different directions and confuse matters enormously. So I don't want to do that today. I just want to suggest that um, I'm not trying to get people to go run off after 1,000 different uh, amazingly challenging goals. What I'm trying to get people to do is to get within their teams and to realize that what they do from the inside of their teams out is what delivers to the customer and where values create exchange rates. That is to say, what we do is worth two of what you do, or a third of what they do, or whatever. And when those exchange rates go into effect, then we have an opportunity to become change leaders, to establish the rate of exchange that is important for our enterprise, that we can tackle, that we can handle, that we can move forward with. I suppose we could look at the world of sports for 1,000 analogies there, but the main thing to understand is whatever sports that we might be most interested in, that is a reflection of the way we prefer to feel safe and secure, not the way we prefer to manage risk down and to take a step forward. The issue about gaming is that we have to allow an opportunity for the strength and the truth and the value created by others to fulfill the life that we lead in delivering on our promises.
Excellent stuff, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff, thank you so much for your wisdom and your words on change leadership. I think this has given us all food for thought, no question about that. And if you would like, folks, you can hear this webinar again. It's being recorded and it'll be out on YouTube. You can get there by joining Business Performance USA, becoming a member, and you can go inside of our community and watch any of the webinars that we've given so far. And you can also download white papers on these topics. We will be adding to our complement of speakers. We have Nancy Roberts coming up week after next, and she's an expert in the field of background screening. So we invite you back. Come hear me next week on the unwelcome impact of disengagement. We know that's a big problem across businesses in America today, in fact, across the world. And so I'll be talking with you about how we can tackle that and what the true cost is for our businesses. So we welcome you back and we thank you for being here today. And with that, I'll be ending the webinar. Bye-bye, folks.
Thanks, everyone.